I've always found that 3D printed gifts can be sort of hit and miss. Not that there's anything wrong with a 3D printed gift, it's awesome, but a die-hard maker might find something interesting that their intended giftee just doesn't. A couple of years ago, I gave my brother-in-law a 3D printed Cthulhu dice tower, and it was beautiful. Magic PLA, 2 colors, super sheen, it was fantastic. I love printing it, I love giving it to him, and I haven't seen it since. And we still play board games together. That little shit. A Death Star keychain can be wonderful, but even for a die-hard Star Wars fan, it might just end up in the trash in a few days. And I can say the same for 3D printed Christmas decorations. We're not doing that this year, and we're not doing a general video about making a 3D printed gift for a loved one either. This year, we're going to show you how to make a few 3D printed personalized gifts for your loved ones. And seeing as it is so close to Christmas, these will also work as a last-minute present. I want these to be really easy to do, so you can design these in minutes and print them at the longest overnight. But I really want these to be able to be personalized, so you can add your own touch to it. And I want this to be really easy to do, so we're not going to use any CAD or very, very, very minimal CAD use. Come on, let's face it, not everyone wants to spend weeks getting acquainted with how to use Fusion 360 or Blender. Trust me, I've been there. It's not fun having one CAD window open and then alt-tabbing to the YouTube tutorial in order to show you how to do the CAD in the first place. I've been there. In fact, I am still here. It's lonely. So here are 3 ideas that you can use this Christmas that are basically unique and no one has done before. Enjoy. Okay, first up is the gift box. And yes, we're starting easy, but gift boxes are really easy to do and they're absolutely beautiful, and having someone's name on it is just really heartwarming. Firstly, there are a million designs on Thingiverse and printables and what have you, so pick whatever you want. The personalized bit is the name. And some time ago, getting lettering on the 3D print was difficult. You had to use CAD, there was no getting around that. But now a lot of slicers are incorporating basic CAD features like text generation. So let's take a look. So here we have our chosen model in Prusa Slicer. We can see there's several parts. We got a ribbon top, we got a little bow, we got ribbon on the side, and that's the part where I'm going to attach the sign. So you can see on each side there is a little slot for it to go onto. Now we just need to edit one of them so that the sign is on the very front of the model. So let's delete everything. Okay, we're just turning it upside down to position it so we can add a little cylinder on top just like this. I want to position it as well so that it's right on top, centered on top of that little ribbon strip. Okay, that looks pretty good. And now we can add some text. So let's rotate this text a bit so it's flat on the cylinder and position it. So let's rotate this text so it's lying flat on top of the cylinder, and we can edit the text as well to include your loved one's name. Now always put it in bold and make it as bold as possible so that you won't have any issues printing it in case your nozzle is just too big for the lettering. And then we can just position it right on top, and we can make it a bit bigger as well. Now the lettering itself is just a little bit too high, so we can lower it on the Z-axis to a couple of millimeters. It looks great. So now we can just slice it. Now that we're using the M600 command, we can ask Prusa Slicer to stop the print at a certain layer right there as soon as the text begins. And that's basically it. So slice it again and it should be ready to go. The only hard thing about this is how small you make the text, because if you use a normal 0.4 millimeter nozzle and the text is very small, there's only going to be like 1 or 2 perimeters, and for some thin parts in the text, it might just not print at all because it's smaller than the size of the nozzle. We are actually using a Revo 0.25 millimeter nozzle for this one. The text is very small and it came out really, really flawlessly. But if you don't have a small nozzle, then you can also use the ironing feature in your slicer to give it a more cohesive look. But if you do have a 0.4 millimeter nozzle only, then you can just make the text bigger like we did here. This is a normal 0.4 millimeter nozzle and it came out really nicely. The other thing about the text is that you can see here that the sign and the text are 2 different colors. So here we have a white text on a red sign. Now, in order to do this, I did a filament swap, which means using an M600 command. And not every printer can do this, but you can mod your printer firmware to actually do this for both Marlin and Clipper firmware, if it's possible to mod your firmware. And we'll talk about that later, so stay tuned. Easy idea, easy to print. You can have it done in a few hours. Great addition to a little present. It doesn't get ripped apart in the process. and you can keep it for the next gift giving, even swapping the name for someone else if you want. All right, what's up next? Okay, so I really like this one. So I've spoken about Hueforge in the past before. I really love this program. It's a cute little program that turns a image into a full color STL, which you can use to print in multiple colors with filament swaps and the M600 command. Yes, I love the M600 command. It sounds like a lot, but it's actually quite easy to do. If you have a Clipper printer, it's as simple as adding some lines into your CFG file and saving it, and that's it. If you have a Marlin-based printer, it's a little bit more complex, but it's still relatively easy to do. And if you've done a firmware update before, then you won't have any issues with this. If you want to find out how to do it, there are some links to tutorials in the description below. So with Hueforge, you can use any image and turn that into an STL. So maybe you're artistically gifted and you want to scan in your work, import it into Hueforge, you can do that. Maybe you found a cool movie poster, you want to do that? No problem. Maybe you just found something cool online. Of course, Hueforge. Eat your heart out, Displayed. So just import it into Hueforge and choose your filaments. There is an exhaustive list of preset filament options to choose from. I would recommend using something like Polymaker because they have basically all of their information on Hueforge already. This in itself would make a cool present, but we're gonna go one step further and turn it into a jigsaw. And a jigsaw that is printed in one go so that you can take it off the build plate, break off the pieces, and it's ready to go. Nifty. So now we just need to import the STL that we got from Hueforge, put it into Prusa Slicer, and we can change the infill to 100%. This is necessary for all Hueforge files. And make sure that the layers are exactly the same as what we chose on Hueforge. So we chose a 0.08mm layer height and the base was 0.16mm, and we can slice it. And this is what it looks like. And now we can tell Prusa Slicer to stop the print at certain layer heights like we did with the gift box, although this time we're using several colors. We're actually using 5 colors, so we just need to ask Prusa Slicer to stop at the specific points, and this is what it looks like. And we can also change the colors in the preview to match the colors that we actually chose for the filament, so you can see exactly what it looks like in the preview. Looks good. Now, as you can see in Hueforge, they're all basically very, very thin parts. Obviously we want this, we don't want it to be huge, and we want certain colors to blend with each other, so it's normal to have a Hueforge export that is 1 to 2mm only. But if we do that as a jigsaw, then the actual part will be very flexible, so we need to add some reinforcement. And to do this, we're going to add a generic shape in Prusa Slicer that is the same size as the original Hueforge STL, and we're going to position that just underneath the Hueforge STL so that it is being reinforced, and the whole part is going to be about 3 to 4mm high now, which will give it a lot more rigidity. Okay, the next thing we need is a pattern template for the jigsaw, and luckily there is a really easy to use generator online. You can find it here, and you can choose whatever parameters you want. For us, it's not going to be a very complex jigsaw piece. We're just going to do 5x5 tiles, and this can export as an SVG. I recommend choosing a size that is considerably less than the part that you're using from Hueforge, because the lines in the SVG are relatively thin. So that means the gaps between each jigsaw piece is also going to be very thin, which will make it a little difficult to remove as well. So for this, we chose a 60x60 size, whereas the Hueforge part was 200x200. And we can scale that up in Prusa Slicer so that the gaps between each jigsaw piece are a bit wider and we can easily break them off. Okay, seeing as we added this generic box underneath the STL, our height is much bigger now, obviously, and our presets for the filament color changes are not quite correct now, so we need to readjust those. So just like we did before, add them for the specific layers where you want to change the color. And now what we need to do is we need to add the jigsaw template. So we do that by adding a part and selecting the SVG file that we downloaded. And that loads it up. And remember, we chose a smaller size, so we just need to increase the size of this one to just kind of overstep the size of the Hueforge STL. As you can see, it's a little bit off center, so we just need to center that and also make it a little bit bigger. The next thing we need to do is change the parameters for the pattern by changing its infill, putting that as 0%, and also changing the layers for the top and bottom and the perimeters that are all set to 0. So this will essentially be a hollow piece, and it can cut out the part from the Hueforge file that we already have. And we can slice it and we can see that the jigsaw pattern has been cut out perfectly. That's looking really nice. So basically all we need to do now is print it and change the filaments throughout the print, and it's good to go. So now we have our finished piece and we should be able to easily break away each piece. This actually wasn't possible a few months ago. Not with this method anyway. You would have had to use CAD because you need to turn that SVG into an STL. But since Prusa Slicer came out with their new update, which enables importation of SVG files, then we can do this, and it makes things way, way easier. So to everyone at Prusa, thanks. Okay, next one is a bit more technical because we sort of have to use CAD, but it's very minimal and the results are awesome. This is an LED marquee, and to create it, all you need is an image of a text file that can be exported into an SVG, and then into a CAD program, and then into an STL. It sounds like a lot, but it's not, trust me. You don't necessarily need Blender or Fusion 360 to do this, but you do need a program that can export an image as a vector file like the SVG we have used before, so that is why I am using Adobe Illustrator here. You can of course use Inkscape, which is a free to download program and works just the same way as Illustrator in that it can export to SVGs. And you can of course also use Tinkercad as your CAD program, so you don't have to download any other CAD program or pay for it, so it's really, really easy to use. There are a bunch of tutorials on how to make these. Actually, there's tons of different kinds of ways in order to make an LED marquee, but pretty much all of them require using Fusion 360 or Blender. And I want to keep this as simple as possible. So I figured out a way in order to use just Illustrator or Inkscape if you wish, with Tinkercad. So you don't need to download anything. It's a super easy program. I think this is a lot simpler and way quicker to do than any of the tutorials that I've watched on YouTube. So here we are in Illustrator, and this is the text with offset that I've created. Very simple. Basically all we're doing is creating a little bit of text with the text box and then putting a 2-point offset on it. Simply just select the text, go to path, offset path, and choose your offset. How big you want it depends on how big you want it on your final design. So I've put it in 2 different colors so it's a bit contrasted, and I've copied the red parts down and also copied them again and created a larger offset for those so they are a little bit thicker, and we'll come back to that. And open up Tinkercad. So now we can just import those SVGs that we created. And here we go. This is your basic shape. So firstly, we need to create a base. So first thing we need to do is basically just copy the shape over. And then with the original, we can change the fill mode to silhouette so we have a base, and bring over the copied piece, position it right on top of it, make sure there's no overspill, and make it as big as you want. And there we go. The only thing we need now is the diffusers. So we go back to Illustrator, and this is why I copied those red parts and created an additional offset. We're going to use those bigger parts as the diffusers. So what we need to do is save each particular letter as an SVG and import those into Tinkercad separately. So now we can just import those offsets. And here's the O. Let's just bring it up and change its height so it's tiny. I think 1 point will do. And now we can just position that on top of the O and make sure it is lined up as well as possible with the space that we created there. As you can see, there's a little bit of blending between each shape, and that's brilliant because we can see how much of an offset there actually is. And we can do the same with the next shapes. Okay, so now we have the diffusers put in. Now what we need to do is copy those shapes over and position them to the side for a minute, and then select the original ones and turn them into holes so that they carve out a piece of the original STL for our diffusers to fit into. And I'm going to change the height a little bit so it's a little bit deeper and change them all to holes again. Here we go. And now what you want to do is create a cylinder shape. And this is going to be the holes between each letter so that you can fit the cable strip in. So we need to just position this between the O and the H so that there is a hole between them that is big enough for the LED strip to go into. And we can also do the exact same thing for the space between the H and the exclamation mark. And then the same thing for the space between the little dot under the exclamation mark. And there we go, we can export that piece out. And this is what it looks like in Personalised. We can see that there's a little gap that's been carved out for the diffusers to push into, and there are holes between the lettering so the LED strip can go into. Nice. And then you can simply export the diffuser shapes of the O, the H, and the exclamation mark as STLs and print them separately, and they can be easily put into the carve that you made there. And that's it. This process will work for smaller marquees, but if you want to do a big one like we have, the process is exactly the same, except you need to export the lettering individually, and then you can group it all together and have it like this. Once you have your parts printed, you can glue them all together and run the LED strip through the lettering, and it should look beautiful. So there you have it. 3 easy ideas for last minute gifts this Christmas. If you're like me and you haven't done any Christmas shopping yet, then these might be quite useful to you. Seriously, I've just got my wife a present. I can't give everyone an LED marquee. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed what you saw, consider clicking that like button and that subscribe button too. We hope you and yours have a wonderful Christmas, and we'll see you in the new year. Later. What happens to elves when they're naughty? Santa gives them the sack. Who delivers presents to cats? Santa Paws. How does Christmas Day end? With the letter Y. What do monkeys sing at Christmas? Jungle balls. Let's get one more. What did one snowman say to the other? Can you smell carrots? Okay. Oh, this is embarrassing. I'm so sorry, everyone.